Okay, I guess we can start. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our second MEXA Accelerator workshop. I'm Joana from Neuromatch, and I'll be guiding you today. So today we'll focus on co-producing research with lived experience experts, a very important topic, especially thinking about embedding lived experience meaningfully in your mental health and generative AI projects. So very happy to be here with you. So just before we start, here's a quick walk through today's agenda. So we will start with some insights from Wellcome on lived experience in research and their approach. After that, we will hear from a fantastic expert panel, and I'll introduce our experts shortly. Then we will move into the breakout rooms where some of you will have the chance to present your lived experience plans and get feedback from peers and the experts and hopefully refine your ideas. And finally, we'll have a group share and a Q&A and a wrap-up session with some resources and next steps. Just also want to say that today we're joined by the wonderful Neuromatch team and by our colleagues at Wellcome. So huge thank you to everyone that is participating and supporting the event today. So now, as usual, a little bit of housekeeping. So please keep yourself muted if you're not speaking. We'd love to see you. So if you can, please keep your camera on, especially in the breakout rooms. Use the raise your hands function on Zoom if you'd like to speak, and if possible, introduce yourself. And also use the chat whenever you have comments or questions. We'll be checking the chat throughout and we'll try to address everything. If you need extra help, you can DM our tech support, Courtney, today. Thank you, Courtney. We've also enabled the live translated caption, so you just need to activate that yourself if that's useful for you. And very important, be kind and respectful to each other. And yeah, please have in mind that we are recording this session so that people that can join today can watch it later. And that's it for the housekeeping. And with that, it's my great pleasure to hand it over to Hannah Atkinson, who's a Senior Research Manager at Wellcome. And Anna will be sharing some insights with us about Wellcome's approach to lived experience. Over to you, Anna, and thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Joanna. So yeah, as Joanna says, I'm Hannah. I work in the lived experience team within Wellcome's mental health team. And I know that Neuromatch did a few events around lived experience in the run-up to applying for the accelerator. So hopefully you've all got some idea of sort of Wellcome's approach, but I'll just take you through sort of like a very quick recap of the way we think about it. And then I want to try and give you a little bit of insight into what our committee members are going to be looking for when they are assessing your full stage applications. Next slide, please. So to start off, just with our definition of lived experience, which hopefully you've all seen before. So we understand lived experience as a unique form of knowledge, insight, and expertise that comes from having experience of mental health challenges. And when we refer to people with lived experience, we mean people who identify as having mental health problems either in the past or currently. And we recognise that, like, across different geographies, across different contexts, it's not always that easy to access services, and there's different levels of stigma with different conditions. So we don't expect LE experts to have been diagnosed by professionals or to have accessed formal services. It's more a matter of whether they self-identify as having experienced anxiety, depression, or psychosis. And just on this, I just wanted to really highlight that. Particularly dependent on what your project is looking at, there may be a role for clinicians or for carers as well, but these should not act as a substitute for that first-hand experience. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to sort of quickly acknowledge, I won't go through this in detail, but I wanted to acknowledge how much today's lived experience movement is indebted to the disabled people's rights movement and their maxim of sort of nothing about us without us. So the insights of those with first-hand lived experience are absolutely critical to revealing assumptions about, firstly, what is wanted in terms of care, but also what will work and what will be safe. And without meaningful lived experience input, we risk conducting research and ultimately creating tools that are ineffective or even dangerous. So our approach to lived experience is underpinned both by an ethical imperative, but also by a conviction that when done properly, it will make research more relevant and deliver better outcomes that will be more trusted by the community. Next slide, please. So in terms of what lived experience involvement might look like in your projects, we are really looking for it to be embedded throughout the whole research pipeline. And the fact that you have this accelerator stage now to work on your proposals, we really hope that you will make the most of sort of co-designing your projects with lived experience experts and making sure that they are involved in sort of the project design, the approaches to data collection, the way you think about the analysis of your data, and also reporting and dissemination, so contributing to outputs, publications, and research findings. I won't go through that in detail, but we can absolutely share the slides if that's useful. Next slide, please. So I promised to talk to you a little bit about what we're going to be asking our committee members to look for when it comes to assessing your applications for the full stage. So they'll be given questions along these lines to help guide their critical thinking. So please be thinking about these while you're designing your applications at the moment. So firstly, in terms of research focus, does the project align with the needs and priorities of people with lived experience? And hopefully that will be very evident if you have co-created these proposals working with lived experience experts at that point. In terms of your engagement plans, we'll be looking to see where are people with lived experience involved throughout the research. So is it, as I mentioned, across all the stages of the pipeline? Do they hold positions throughout sort of different levels of seniority in the team, including sort of leadership and governance levels? And are those the appropriate sort of points of engagement and levels of engagement? And just to very much highlight that obviously this is a cool looking at generative AI, and in tech it can be quite common that the engagement of the community is limited to user testing, and just really sort of emphasising that we're hoping for something that goes far beyond that for this call. Then sort of what are the engagement mechanisms that people are using? How often will lived experience experts be involved? And what will be the sort of manner of input? So there's plenty of different models. I'm not going to recommend one over the other in terms of sort of advisory groups, co-researchers, steering group membership. But we will be asking our committee members to look for why have you chosen this engagement model? Is it frequent enough to be meaningful? How will lived experience experts achieve a deep understanding of the project and in order to be able to contribute meaningfully? And how will they get feedback and updates about what their input has influenced within the project? Next slide, please. Okay, so in terms of the team, we'll be wanting to see whether the team have the necessary expertise to involve and collaborate with lived experience experts, and have they thought about what is needed in terms of how to make this collaboration the most effective? So will there be someone responsible for sort of ensuring that lived experience perspectives are meaningfully integrated? Is there any training needs across the team? So it may be that lived experience experts who are less familiar with the more technical side of things may need upskilling there, but it could also be that other team members need some upskilling in sort of methods of engagement, communicating in a more easily understandable way. So we'll be looking at those sorts of things. A really important one, budget. It's great to see plans that sort of have extensive involvement, but often we find that when we then come to look at the budget, this hasn't been costed. And I know Wellcome is a bit of an unusual organisation that, in this sense, that lots of other funders maybe would cut these costs to try and trim it down, but we want to see this resourced appropriately, so including sort of conference attendance for lived experience experts, the training needs that we just discussed, all of that. Then understanding, do the applicants understand what the role of lived experience collaborators is? And for this we'll be looking that lived experience experts truly are involved as sort of equal collaborators and experts who can inform the design, governance, and delivery of the research. Their involvement shouldn't require ethics approval or consent forms. It should just be working alongside any other colleague. Finally, representation. Are the lived experience experts that the team are collaborating with representative of the communities that they are researching? So we'll be looking to see, have you plans, or have you already hopefully recruited from the most appropriate community to get the answers that you need and to get the insight that you need for your project to be successful? Next slide, please. So just before I hand over to my colleague, I just wanted to share what is, I think, quite a helpful resource. And eagle-eyed among you might have seen that one of the co-authors here is Qian Yang, who I believe spoke at the last one of these accelerator events. So this is from a paper called The Participatory Turn in AI Design, where the authors have looked at the different levels and mechanisms of engaging different stakeholders, going from more sort of consultation to sort of co-ownership. And given that you do have this accelerator phase to sort of work on your plans, we are hoping you will be moving sort of more to the right side of this. And you can see that as part of this paper, the authors looked at 80 different projects looking at generative AI. And you can see that there's much fewer on sort of that ownership column than there are on the consult column. But we'd really like to encourage you sort of to be bold and to think about sort of how you can be innovative in your lived experience practice. Next slide, please, which I believe is my last. I'll just wait for it to move on. Perfect, thank you. So in terms of sort of some potential use cases for these very early stage generative AI research projects, just a few ideas of what involvement might look like. So as I say, we'd be really keen to see innovative practice. And also would encourage you, if you are coming up with new methodologies in terms of involvement, please do publish on the process as well as publishing on your findings, so that other people in this field can learn from what you've undertaken. So yeah, that sort of links to the second point. If you can propose the groundwork for a comprehensive lived experience and AI and mental health methodology, that would be hugely valuable to other people working in this field, and we would be super excited to see something along those lines. And then sort of how to overcome bias in data sets. Within Wellcome, we have commissioned quite a few reports that have shown a high degree of hesitancy around the use of AI tools in mental health. And it's absolutely crucial that the concerns of those with lived experience are taken into account so that they can be mitigated against. Bias is one that comes up a lot in these sort of reports. So we want to make sure that involvement is really authentic so that we can create systems that are worthy of trust. And that is it from me. I'm going to hand over now to Shuranjeet, who's going to give you some more inspiration as to what this might look like in practice and how you might approach this.
Thank you so much, Anna. I'll just quickly introduce you, Shuranjeet, with the great pleasure. So Shuranjeet Singh works as a lived experience consultant at Wellcome to help shape positive lived experience practice in mental health research funding. And he's also the founder of Tariki, which works with the Punjabi communities in approaching mental health. So very happy to have you with us. And over to you, Shuranjeet.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And Joanna, if possible, if we could just go back to the timeline slide that Hannah showed a few moments ago. I just want to give people a bit of additional context to these conversations about lived experience involvement, which have gone on for decades, really. And it helps us to understand how that discipline has developed over time, and also how we want to be able to broaden and expand the discipline moving forwards. So as Hannah mentioned, the work that we do around lived experience involvement sits in decades of activists, academics, researchers who have been fighting for greater levels of participation between those who experience mental health challenges and the systems that they interact with. At the beginning, this was a question about being involved in one's care. So as we know, those with mental health challenges were often separated from the care that they received, and care was done to them. as opposed to care being developed in collaboration with them. And many people and groups fought for change in this area, particularly in the 1950s and 1960s. And what this has led to is greater collaboration between those who experience mental health challenges and health services which support them in co-developing the care that they receive. However, we aren't operating at a service delivery level. We're talking about knowledge generation. We are talking about developing the key building blocks to knowledge that will then, at a later point, potentially inform intervention development, service delivery. So we're slightly kind of in a slightly different part of the conversation, and therefore our conceptualization of lived experience involvement also needs to be kind of forthright and innovative. So whilst we might have participatory approaches to service delivery, within the research and knowledge development space, these conversations haven't taken such steps forward. And so really at Wellcome, we try to drive forward these conversations so that the discipline of lived experience involvement, this participatory methodology, can develop and evolve just as other disciplines within mental health science. And so when we're thinking about lived experience involvement, we're not just thinking about individuals who experience mental health challenges getting involved in research. We're not thinking just about participation in research. We're thinking about equal collaborators, equal partners, much like other colleagues who we undertake research alongside. And so with that in mind, we also need to bear in mind that lived experience involvement within mental health science is itself a discipline. And with any kind of discipline, we need to take it forward. We need to apply best methodologies. We need to also critique existing methodologies, because without critique, these methodologies aren't going to be refined and they won't move forward to ensure that we're developing knowledge that is most appropriate and most applicable to those communities that we're trying to serve. And so building on what Hannah mentioned, we need to be thinking about how we can look at existing literature about lived experience involvement within the context of our work. We need to be looking at existing methodologies. We need to be applying those, but also if they don't necessarily go far enough, we are in a really unique position to be able to add to that body of knowledge, to be able to add to the literature about lived experience involvement within the context of, say, generative AI. So I think it's a really exciting space to be in. Often lived experience involvement is an afterthought in different parts of mental health science, but at Wellcome, we've been trying to center the conversation around lived experience involvement to ensure that we have the right mechanisms in place so that researchers and our grantees are thinking about this at the start rather than thinking about backfilling it after they've received funding, for example. And so with that in mind, we are in a very unique position where we can actually push boundaries around lived experience involvement. And as the other slide with the methodology table further towards the end of the presentation shows, within the context of participatory AI projects, we see a lot of projects there within the kind of consulting column, but as soon as you go past consultation and into inclusion, collaboration, and ownership, we see different projects falling off. And ideally, we want to see the project that we're working with really taking a step up in terms of lived experience involvement, going beyond the consultation, going beyond the inclusion, thinking about things that propose a higher level of equality and higher level of ownership, shared ownership with lived experience experts. And so it's a really exciting opportunity to be able to contribute to the knowledge, not only in the context of kind of generative AI, but also in the context of lived experience involvement within generative AI. And for me, that's a particularly important point, because if we want to do strong, rigorous, and reliable lived experience involvement moving forward, as the AI space grows and grows and becomes more and more technical and more and more subfields develop, we need to ensure that we're supporting the lived experience within AI-based research and mental health to also grow alongside it. And so as Hannah mentioned, we need to be thinking in a bold way. We need to be thinking innovatively, and it's okay to try things that don't work just as you'd hoped. It's okay to try things that haven't been done before. It's okay to critique existing methodology. It's okay to apply existing methodology and see if it works within a slightly different use case. But we need to be writing about these methodological applications, the improvements, the reflections, because as we know, a discipline only grows as its body of knowledge expands. And the body of knowledge only really expands when we see more peer-reviewed papers on different topics. The conversations are able to be sparked in slightly different ways. We see papers presented at conferences. We see conversations at conferences. We see this kind of space around lived experience being spoken about beyond the realms of informal research outputs. And so that's one of my pleas to yourselves, which is whatever we do about lived experience involvement, even if it's just the application of an existing methodology, it needs to go beyond a section in a bigger research output. We need to be putting research outputs out there related to lived experience involvement, related to methodology, related different conceptual questions, if we want the discipline to expand, to take steps forward, and to grow, just as we've seen, the role of AI-focused research in mental health also grow over recent years. And so that's my main plea to yourselves. This is a chance to be bold, it's a chance to be brave, and it's a chance to apply things, critique things, and build a discipline which is absolutely needed within the context of mental health science. It's something that we need to give proper thought to, need to invest in properly, as we're doing here at Wellcome. But it's something that we also need buy-in from our researchers so that we know that researchers also care about doing lived experience involvement as best as possible. Because we start at a level and we don't want that level to stagnate. We don't want our norms now in lived experience involvement to be the same in 15 years' time. If we look back in 15 years' time and we see similar practices being used that were being used 15 years prior, for me, that's a distinct failure, because there are always going to be ways for us to improve our practice, improve our methodology, and improve our approaches of lived experience involvement. And so if things stay the same for 15 years, I think we've slightly gone wrong. And so this is an opportunity to apply different frameworks. It's an opportunity to improve different frameworks, and it's an opportunity to contribute to a body of knowledge which you might or might not have been thinking about contributing to before this opportunity came along. And so that's my plea around boldness, around bravery, and about being invested ourselves in lived experience involvement and taking positive steps forward. So the research, the knowledge that we're generating becomes more applicable, more usable, and can go out and improve lives in the world around us.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Shuranjeet. And thank you, Anna, for your valuable perspectives. Innovation seems to be a big word here. So let's pause here for questions. So if you have questions, please raise your hand if you'd like to speak and introduce yourself, or add your questions to the chat and we'll call on you. Yes, Rachel, please go ahead with your question.
Hi, I'm Rachel Pressfisher. I'm at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, North Carolina in the US. And I guess my question is sort of, what do you do, or how should we sort of talk about having more than one lived experience group, right? So we've got people who have a mental health concern or challenge or diagnosis, but we also could have clinicians or caregivers, or where we would consider their lived experience to be a bit different, but also very central to informing it. And I'm sort of wondering whether we should talk about that, also as lived experience, or whether we should talk about that slightly differently when we kind of explain because I think we're on track to use similar methods with both groups and integrate those. But I just want to make sure we have the right terminology when we write this up.
Shuranjeet, you want to take that?
Absolutely. I think it's a really good question. And I think ever since we started really forwarding these conversations around lived experience involvement, there has also been another question about, well, actually, we have researchers on our team who have lived experience of different challenges related to mental health. And what we say to that is there's a difference between having experience and then being able to apply that experience as expertise within a specific context or case. So, for example, many of us, when we sit around a table, bring different types of experiences, but depending on our training, depending on the different types of contexts we've been in, we don't necessarily apply all that experience as expertise in different use cases. And so someone who may approach a problem as a researcher, um, depending on their particular situation, they might have lived experiences and mental health challenges, but actually their expertise might still be solidly based in their research training. And so it's a really fine balance, and it's being able to understand, okay, if someone has lived experience of mental health challenges, we need to be confident that if they also have obviously research expertise, are they also then able to apply their lived experience as expertise in different bits of research? And I think it's a really good question because it does get slightly complicated. Yeah.
That, sorry to clarify, that actually wasn't really my question. My question was more that we have clinician lived experience, like their experiences as clinicians, because they're not part of our research team and they're not applying mental health challenges as clinicians, but that if we're doing something where we eventually want it to integrate into a clinical workflow, we need to understand their experience of clinical workflow. And so that also in the way could be similar, or like if you have caregivers where something is intended to work for caregivers, their sort of lived experience of caregiving is different than the person with. So we have both of those elements. And I was just wondering whether we should talk about that as not lived experience, but sort of a different type of expertise or knowledge. Does that help maybe clarify my question a little bit?
Yeah, that was helpful. So, I mean, everything you've described is experiential knowledge. It's knowledge based in experience, and I think it's about qualifying. Okay, yes, we have one group who have experiential knowledge as clinicians, and actually another as caregivers, and we have another group that we work with around who have lived experiences and mental health challenges. But again, I'd refer back to this table, which is actually there might or might not be co-ownership between all of those experiential groups. So you just need to understand where they fit on that matrix.
Fantastic. Thank you. Sharon Lawn, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Hello, Shuranjeet. My question is related to not falling into the trap of thinking that all people in the lived experience movement are the one thing. So in Australia, we have a very broad, diverse lived experience advocacy and leadership sector. So it's like a continuum. At one end, we have MAD studies, etc. So very much people who are in the survivorship of the system thinking. And at the other end, people who are very much aligned with the medical and clinical understanding. So do you have any thoughts around that? Because it's not, it's very easy to propagate the very thing that is fundamental to lived experience of thinking that people are all the same and they are therefore then the other.
That's a really fantastic question, and I think we could sit for hours and look at the genesis of lived experience involvement, as you said, kind of looking at MAD studies and psychiatric approaches on one side, and then thinking about the kind of institutionalization of that on the other side. I think ultimately, if there are folks who have the relevant kind of understanding of these subdisciplines, whether it's MAD studies or psychiatric approaches, I think that would be really interesting to see in the context of this work. So don't feel afraid of applying some of that knowledge and some of that those types of approaches. It's just thinking about how can we bring that together with the focus of the call. And so I think others are going to be at different points on their journey around lived experience involvement as a discipline. And I'd hope that as people develop their understanding, they can see that actually this is more than just people who have experienced mental health challenges and want to help further knowledge within our existing system. Because actually, we know that there are those who are, as you said, survivors, user survivors of mental health systems whose approach to lived experience involvement actually involves fundamentally challenging those systems in the first place. And so I think it's I
Mm.
think it's I think it's a really important part of the conversation that often we might miss out.
Yeah. And perhaps can I just add, because it becomes important when with research methods that we're considering in this area when various tools are used for evidence measurement, for example, are using tools that are very clinically driven, particularly psychological assessment tools. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. One more question from Sarah Markham. Go ahead, Sarah. Thank you. Hello, Sarah.
Hi, I'm Sarah from King's College London. I think your vision is laudatory. My own experience of PPIE. Oh,
We can't hear you, Sarah, properly. Maybe we'll take one of the questions from the chat from Cheryl Francis. Mental health challenges are highly stigmatized in MEMI population, especially low-resource environments. Subsequently, there are high rates of underdiagnosis, and person affected may not identify as having experienced mental health challenges. How would you propose identifying these members of the community as diagnosed or self-identify as when they may not have those identification labels?
Anna, is this one that you'd like to take?
Yeah, sure. It's a really good question and a really good point. So thank you, Sherilyn, for that. I think that this is definitely a challenge in low middle income context that is not necessarily applicable across other contexts. But I think there is sort of some mitigations that you can take in terms of the recruitment. So I think being very sensitive about the way you recruit and making it clear that there will be no expectation of disclosure. So specifying what it is that you're looking for in the advert, if that's the way you're recruiting. But making very clear that people won't have to share sort of details of the diagnosis. You're just looking for that knowledge, that expertise that comes from having had that experience, and there will be no expectation of sharing stories or trauma or anything. The other thing that can be handy is collaborating with networks. And again, these networks are more common in certain geographies than others. But for example, the Global Mental Health Action Network has, as it says in the name, a global presence. And numerous sort of like active membership there across lots of different countries. So that would be my brief answer to that. Shuranjeet, I don't know if there's anything you want to add.
Okay, thank you, Anna. Maybe we'll take one last question from the audience. But if you have other questions, feel free to write them in the chat, and we'll try to address them later today or add them to our FAQs. So, Jinping, go ahead.
Hello, I'm Jinping. I'm from UNC Chapel Hill. And like one of my collaborator, like she is like also she's like curious. She cannot present today. Like she's curious, like if Wellcome is interested in like lived experience with other disease. For example, like she's a expert in cardiovascular health, and she's like curious, like will this like subgroup of like lived experience with cardiovascular, and how will it be different than other like not regular, but other like subset of the patient, will they be interested or not? Thank you.
Thanks so much. Yeah, it's a great question. At the moment, lived experience involvement is only a core part of our mental health strategy, but there are sort of initiatives around sort of community engagement across all of the different health research that we fund. But in terms of the terms that we've introduced today, they're very specific to our mental health program.
Okay. So even like if those like groups also have like mental health issues, but with other diseases that may or may not be like very relevant.
Sorry, you're talking about potentially for your project specific comorbidities if you're looking at a group who have experienced both mental health issues and cardiovascular.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. We would be interested in the experience of that specific comorbidity. I think this is,
Okay.
yeah, we want the most relevant expertise to your research question. So if that's the population you're looking at, then absolutely, it would be good to have both of those experiences.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you everyone for your questions, and thank you Shuranjeet and Hanu for your answers. And please feel free to answer directly to questions in the chat if you wish. If not, we'll try to address them later. And now we're moving into our expert panel. So I'm delighted to introduce our speakers. We'll have with us today Rachel Wurzman, who's a neuroscientist, neuroethicist, and the CEO of NeuroLivd. John Nelson is a mental health advocate and lived experience expert, and he's also the founder of the Pulverize the Stigma movement. And we have also with us Joy Muhia, who's a medical psychologist and the coordinator of the Mental Health Innovation Network at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. And of course, you already heard from Shuranjeet. So each of the speakers will make a short intervention, and I'll ask the speakers to try to stick to their 5 minutes about how they've embedded lived experience in projects, in research or innovation, challenges they faced, and if they have advice for your projects. And then we'll have time for some questions. So Rachel, let's start with you. Thank you.
Hi, thanks, Joanna. I'm Rachel Wurzman. I am the CEO of NeuroLivd. So my career started as a neuroscientist, as somebody with lived experience of a movement disorder with co-occurring other labels with it. As a member of a research team that I joined after networking the fellows when I participated as a patient in clinical studies. And that was really deliberate, just as a means of getting in and getting to know them. But, you know, my insights started with having the experience of serving in that dual role of being on a team, of being somebody in a room, in a clinical team, on a research team that held the identity and experience of the people who were being talked about. And the tension between contributing my lived experience and having an awareness of the way that power differentials and perceptions played a role. So fast forward maybe 15 years in my career when I was co-founding Seek Healing. And what we did was we were building a relational social health intervention to amplify the efficacy of mental health treatment systems. And what we started, our starting indication were deaths of despair. And in particular, it was during the height of the opioid overdose epidemic. And so we were building both an organization, a modality, and a validation and an impact assessment research study all at the same time. And we started with lived experience. So lived experience was baked in from the beginning to the extent that they were the leadership in the organization. They were community members with variety of types of experience, anything from caregivers, because basically we started by building the community, and then the organization came from the community. Everything was integrated throughout. And what I can tell you about doing it that way is some of the challenges. I'll start with the advantages of doing it that way. What we built had an appreciation of the complexities of the way that mental health and stigma play a role in service delivery and play a role in even things like the design and selection of interventions. we had this insight from the beginning. And so it really shaped not just the study, but how the intervention itself was designed. But problems, in addition to the usual ones like communication, where, there's issues balancing keeping information accessible, but capturing complexity. One of the real challenges that I think everybody will encounter here is around the theme of having equal team members. So when you're moving to consulting to co-owning, there's a question of how that works in your intention and how that actually works in practice. And what I've found is that that's really a structural problem. It's a structural problem in some ways, and even how the team is managed, how the team is comprised, all of the very basic elements of how people are collaborating, communicating. It's the difference between having a management structure potentially that is a mutual mentorship versus a hierarchical structure, right? That's kind of the type of structure I'm talking about that influences the way that people partner. And so within that, I think stigma can be covert. It's invisible. We know we're treading on something that is stigmatizing when we catch ourselves pausing before using a word or referring to an identity label. And it can be perpetuated even by people with lived experience, whether they're team members with lived experience who their primary affiliation might be a research team member and they happen to also have relevant lived experience, or somebody from the community. So that's something, and the vulnerability in discussing and bringing one's experience in, both when it's as a team member, there's additional levels that stigma has to be considered and mitigated. Some advice that I have for this is thinking in terms of leveling the playing field. So the more mutuality of vulnerable sharing that's possible, the more that the researchers can bring their whole self and their own intersectional or adjacent experiences. Not everybody has mental health issues to the degree that they qualify for a label, but everybody has struggled, right? And understanding on that level and being able to bring that vulnerability creates an environment that's more conducive to honest sharing. Another real key piece of advice that I have is strategically combine, we found, embedding boundary spanners. So you want to embed boundary spanners, but combine that with with less intensive engagement with people. So you want to have a variety of levels of things like scientific literacy, research literacy on the team. And if your boundary spanner is embedded, but is also a member of the community, this can be done in a variety of ways beyond mental health lived experience engagement. But what you have is you have somebody who can translate between frames of reference and allow those insights to be implemented. So really being thoughtful when it comes to recruitment and inclusivity and representation, I encourage you to think beyond just types of diagnoses, points in a particular patient journey, trajectory, that kind of thing, and be thinking of things like technology literacy, interactions, the degree of interactions with the mental health treatment system, which I think is why it's important to include people who might identify with an issue but don't have a diagnosis, and to have a variety of attitudes towards not just AI, for instance, in this context, but also the mental health treatment system on there. And that's where you're really going to get the most representative and the most insights in that own side of the spectrum.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Over to you, John.
I appreciate it. Well, hi, everybody. Well, first off, I want to start off by thanking Wellcome Trust and MEXA for doing what you're doing. I can't begin to tell you how it is not the norm. You guys are absolutely the rare exception of making sure the lived experience is at the forefront, and you deserve a lot of credit for that because, like I said, it's not the norm. Just real quick, when you guys look at my picture, the reason I have that picture there is because that to me is essentially the visual of what I had to go through for 10 years of my life. I struggled through severe depression, treatment-resistant depression, decade-long battle, just to quickly tell my story, through every single therapeutic intervention that you can imagine. Antidepressants, residential facilities, transcranial magnetic stimulation, electroconvulsive therapy, psychedelics, everything that possibly could happen. And I was saved. My life was saved 3 years ago after undergoing a deep brain stimulation clinical trial out of Mount Sinai Hospital in New York City. The deep brain stimulating electricity in the subcolossal cingulate of my brain, and immediately overnight completely cured me of the hell that was serious mental illness in my body. And so couple things that have come out from me since that surgery, and that's the first is this Pulverize the Stigma. That's just my fun advocacy brand. That's my middle finger to the world. About the fact that these beautiful human beings who are suffering with serious mental illness are being judged, labeled, shamed, and ostracized for a brain disease. I'm biological proof of the brain disease, electrical deficiency in my body. That's it, right? And so coming out kind of strong there and making everybody understand that, the negative thought process that we have is what's bringing people down even further, causing more suffering, causing more death. When I look at what successful lived experience is, I'm going to start this way. The last 3 years I've been out in the world, kind of going through and giving as much, consultation advice that I can from a lived experience standpoint. So I know what really good looks like. And what it starts with is being egoless. When you look at every other industry that's out there, end user feedback, lived experience feedback is the norm, right? I very quickly, my quick analogy is if Boeing's creating a brand new airplane, the very first thing they're doing is they're talking to platinum frequent flyers. And those platinum frequent flyers are along with them for the ride, co-designing the plane the entire time to make sure that the experience is as good as it can get. It's just not the case in this space. And so the fact that we are doing that and the fact that today is focused on that is incredible. And so when I look at what success looks like, it starts with being egoless. You could have 800 initials after your name, but until you absolutely are missing a seat at the table, until you have somebody there who's gone through it. So in my case, unless you know what it's like to live with 1,000 suicidal thoughts a day, you're missing that component. You don't know exactly what people are going through. We have the power to see what others can't see. That is what lived experience is. And so the other thing that's really wonderful about mental health and including lived experiences, guess what? When you are a stigmatized human being, when you are looked at and you are judged and you are labeled, like I said, ostracized, shamed, when people actually ask you for your opinion, it's magical. You get people literally on steroids, ecstatic to tell you every single aspect that they can to help build what you guys are building, what you guys are trying to do to save and make the current world of mental health and mental illness even better. In my experience, it was very close to being a broken world. And so being able to kind of get inside the guts with you guys from a research standpoint and help is just incredible. And so I've seen that firsthand. And how I've seen that firsthand is I work with Motif Neurotech. So these guys are a startup. I started with them when they were three people big. I presented at a conference in Washington, D.C. a couple of years ago. The CEO came right up to me and said, I can only be successful as a company if I have lived experience involved from the very beginning. Will you help me? Again, that should be absolutely the rule. That should be exactly what we should expect, and it's not. And so since that time, what I've been doing with them is I have an equal seat at the table with these guys. We're co-designing from the very beginning. I'm sitting in strategic meetings. I'm helping them out with clinical trial design. We're developing the actual products themselves hand by hand. Look at their website, co-design directly with lived experience, doing promotional stuff and being out in front of for that company and for that team. And it's going to be a successful company once we get this thing launched because we have been a vital portion of this from the very beginning. We're building it from that point. We started with 3 different people on our lived experience advisory board. I'm responsible for running that. Those 3 people have turned into 7 over the last 10 years. Over the last 2 years. We're going to be going up to 8, and then we phase in new people every year. We're going to bring in an additional new person so that we continue to have those different perspectives and voices. But here's the thing. Every single person on that team, on this lived experience advisory board, they're not one-off patient market research. We have relationships. They're part of the team. I know the engineers. I know the manufacturers of this company. I know every single aspect of it. These guys do too. We're about to come on site. Everybody's coming in, going on site directly to the company in the first quarter of this year to make the experience even that much deeper and to make the relationship that much stronger. And so that right there is what you call an amazing inclusion from a lived experience standpoint. And the last thing that I'll say is, as we're developing and building it, bringing in these folks, not only are we doing quarterly advisory board meetings, we have one-offs all the time. I have text message level relationships with the folks. We get their input whenever we need it, and we have a full diversified version too. We have obviously folks at different stages within depression because that's what we're focusing on. We have folks that have only done antidepressants. We have some that actually have neurotechnology like me in their body. We have some that have not done ECT, some where TMS was successful. We also have caregivers because I do truly think, depending on what condition you're going through, schizophrenia, for instance, caregivers massive, absolutely massive, right? You need to get their perspective. The only person that this entire torturous hell that I went through for a decade than me was my wife. So getting her perspective is important, right? So we looked at that and we thought, okay, let's get a caregiver in here, somebody who has an early adult, a young adult in their life. Let's get somebody who's a caregiver who is a caregiver of an older adult, right? Like trying to get every single aspect that we can to see this from a different world. We have a canine cop, right? We have a working professional. We have every single aspect that you can fit and you can manage to make this happen. We have rural America now included too. So that is also a huge component. But the biggest summary I would say is this is not one-off market research. This is an absolute equal seat at the table. This is a long journey, long relationship. It absolutely should be. And again, I'll circle back to my beginning. Thank you, Wellcome Trust. Thank you, MEXA, for making this an absolute priority because it 100% should be. It's not, doesn't make any sense. So thank you guys for changing the game.
Thank you so much, John. Over to you, Joy.
Well, thank you so much for having me today. And I'll start by just a brief introduction of the Mental Health Innovation Network, which is a community of over 13,000 mental health innovators. And this range from researchers to practitioners to service user advocates, donors, policymakers from across the globe, all with the aim of sharing innovative resources and ideas to promote mental health. And one key thing that we've had said over and over is having a person's lived experience as part of the core team. So in doing so, at MHIN, as part of our advisory group, we have a lived expert organization representative because all our advisory group members are representatives of organizations. So we always ensure that, the voices need to be heard and not just as a consultancy basis, but from the key decision-making processes. And then in addition to that, being intentional in showcasing innovations that are peer-led, because there is a lot of peer-led work that is being done in the communities in different places, but many a times it's not really shown. And there are very many successful examples that have been done, such as like the peer-led recovery groups for people with psychosis in South Africa. We have the Succeed Africa project, which is supporting comprehensive care and empowerment of people with psychosocial disability in Africa, and just showcasing how exactly are they incorporating lived experts in the research process, not just as participants, but from the design to the data collection to even writing up of the manuscripts. They're involved in the publication, and then also going to present in conferences, being able to, share the outputs that they've been part of working on. And then also storytelling is a very big element when it comes to lived experts because it is one of the ways we combat stigma. So people need to hear the stories and the success stories that there are those who are living with mental health conditions, but they're really successful. They've gone on to develop organizations. They're doing great things out there. So giving them that opportunity to showcase their story in the way they best see fit. And then in additionally, of course, working together with networks, like we work closely with the Global Mental Health Peer Network, work closely with the Movement for Global Mental Health. Additionally, as part of our hubs, because we have 3 hubs, we have an Africa hub, Latin American Caribbean hub, and an Asia hub. And all our hubs have peer researchers as part of the core team. So for example, our Africa hub is actually led by peer researchers from the Succeed Africa project. And in doing so, we ensure that it's not just like every diverse perspective is incorporated in the decision making, in the follow-up of outputs, basically from the beginning to the very end of the process. Additionally, we're also involved in various projects such as the Mental Health Leadership Program that is led by Africa CDC. And as part of this program, we are part of the fourth pillar, which is all about civil society organizations and networking. And this pillar is strategically aimed to ensure that the whole program is accountable to and informed by perspectives of Africans with lived experience of mental health conditions and psychosocial disabilities. So not just saying, but being intentional, whereby we get to review the different pillars across the whole program and how exactly are they incorporating persons with lived experience. And this accountability element helps keep the whole program accountable, not just, we say we will do something, but we actually get the team of lived experts to review the program and say that at this point, maybe we need to do this element needs to be added for it to be more inclusive. If you're bringing on board different lecturers for the different short courses, do you have a lecturer who will talk on lived experience? Will you have a lived experience panel, just to ensure that all elements of the program are incorporated? And in doing so, I think I will not repeat the challenges that have been mentioned because they're all more or less the same. We have the stigma. We do have safeguarding, which is a key element when it comes to involving persons with lived experience in research. Power imbalances that we really need to ensure that they're not, once you bring them on board, you're not just maintaining the hierarchical structure, because if you do that, they will not be able to contribute as effectively. And then one other key thing is reasonable accommodation. And I will go a bit more into this reasonable accommodation. And when we talk about reasonable accommodation in mental health research, what do we mean? It means that we have flexible participation. So whenever it comes to scheduling and involving lived experts, having flexible timings, avoiding maybe really early mornings or late evenings, pacing, having an option to spread contributions over time rather than in one intensive session, and then also having different participation modes. In terms of communication and information when it comes to reasonable accommodation, one thing is plain language materials. I know most of our research is dealing with AI, but we can be able to simplify technical or academic language into accessible summaries, which can also be shared ahead of meetings. Having multiple formats, providing written, visual, or audio explanations of, AI methods or the study goals that you're having. Sharing meeting prep agendas, and questions in advance to give them time to process so that when we come to the meeting, they're able to contribute meaningfully. And then also creating a supportive environment. Whenever we have, for example, a physical meeting, you need to be able to ask if they would like to have a support person with them in the meeting, because that is important. Also having check-ins and time for groundings, maybe at the beginning or at the end of the meetings. And then also having like a safe space agreements where you establish respectful, non-judgmental group norms, offering the ability to like step out or pause or, skip sensitive topics without penalty. And then, of course, one other thing we cannot forget is like the health and well-being. So having regular pauses in long meetings, just because, we all zone out at some point. So to ensure the continuous engagement, do you have regular pauses? In a meeting, do you have a quiet room or a space for rest as the session is ongoing? Just because at times one may need to step out for a minute and just recharge and come back. So maybe either be it in quiet rooms or low stimulus environments, or even camera off options for virtual sessions. And then also a clear plan whereby if a participant feels distressed, what are the support contacts that are involved? So having a proper safeguarding mechanism. In terms of capacity building, we can also do training whereby you have introductory sessions on AI, ethics, and research to build that confidence. And then mentorship where you can pair a researcher, ally, or peer with someone with lived experience, just to be able to ensure, there is that cross-learning. And this avoids the element where we keep saying that, oh, this is a bit too technical, they may not understand, but if you're able to pair them and this is explained, this is possible. When it comes to, of course, administration,
yes,
last point.
Thank you.
Yes. There's a fair compensation and reimbursement because you cannot involve them without compensating them. Just the same way we get to compensate everyone else, they also need to be compensated. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Joy. Thank you all. Those were very powerful examples, and thank you for the sharing. So we're running a little bit late, but let's open the floor for a couple of questions. So please raise your hand if you'd like to speak, or pop your question in the chat for our fantastic panelists. Any questions? Go ahead, Daniel.
Hi, Daniel, to you, Munich. I have a question regarding the general, let's say, amount or size lived experience should be included in the project, right? So I guess there's a span of variations as far as I understood, from including experts and focus groups, etc., to including an actual research partner that considers, or society that considers actively researching lived experience, right? So this is, I think, the bandwidth of options.
I would like to take that question. Maybe it's more for Wellcome.
I'm happy to respond if the panelists don't want to. Yes, there are numerous different involvement methodologies, basically. And what we're going to be looking for is that the involvement that you're proposing is the appropriate level to be able to get the inputs that will be meaningful in sort of having influence over the project. So if you're, for example, a focus group or an advisory group, we'll be looking, are they meeting regularly enough? What does the membership of that look like? How are they empowered to critique the project? Do they have the background knowledge in order to be able to do that? What are the feedback loops where they're being informed as to that influence and being able to challenge that? So it's those sort of questions. Is it the appropriate level? And is it going to be effectual in meaningfully being able to co-shape the project?
Thank you, Anna. Any other comments from the...
Sorry, Daniel, I think you may have just responded, but you're on mute.
Yeah, thank you very much. I also have a follow-up question, but maybe the others go first, and then I can, if we find the time.
We have a question on the chat. To what extent should we partner with community-based organizations that focus on mental health and have members with lived experience versus only within individual members?
So I'll address that potentially, and it's going to depend. It's going to depend on the project, and there are, ideally, I think it really is a mix. So keep in mind that these community-based organizations are nonprofits. Their budget, their staff, and their time is really, really constrained, and they may not necessarily have the internal infrastructure. The ones that have more of a relationship with families or with people in a really deep level don't always have the infrastructure to be able to connect engagement requests, and connecting you with their members with lived experience is something that's resource intensive. And it's important to make sure that there's funding that is provided almost like indirects for those organizations, and not just to compensate those experts when they're engaging with you. So that's a really important thing. And maintaining relationships with them. There are different requirements for the way that you engage with those organizations versus the way that you might engage with individuals. So you want to be thoughtful about that, and consider different things that they offer. So community groups can help you understand and strategize about who to involve depending on where they are in their lived experience journey. They may have awareness of the, more like people who become almost professional, people with lived experience, the really, really experienced lived experience expert and consultants who are aware of the depth and the range of experience of other people with that condition, and are more and less able to speak for the group and to understand where their own experience differs from that. When you're engaging with individuals, that can be really valuable too, because those are going to be people who aren't as strongly necessarily motivated or desperate to get involved with the larger community. They may have really busy lives and experiences that bring you perspectives that you also need. And so then the question is what can you learn from those larger organizations that can guide the way that you recruit those individuals, engage with those individuals, and interact with those individuals. So that's my 2 cents on that, or 50 cents on that.
Yeah, and just
one other thing that I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, one thing that I was going to add, kind of a mixture of all the questions, is it as you guys develop the lived experience councils and kind of in for that long-term play, then the number one thing that you want to do is make sure everybody feels comfortable, that there's significant rapport. We do that with a closed door session the first 10 minutes before a meeting. We also do that afterwards. We are 100% a unit. And so people feeling comfortable is massively important. And then the other thing that I'll give you guys, and also keep the floor open for different ideas, thoughts, and perspectives, and things that they want to go, or they want to provide input on that we may not have thought about. That's important. And then the last thing is, I didn't have schizophrenia, bipolar. I didn't have those, but I had serious mental illness. Serious mental illness, in my opinion, 90% of it is the exact same, because your life is getting absolutely wrecked. Families are, 100% being destroyed at the same time. Seeing you go through this, and it's horrific. The symptoms are different. That's the 10% difference, but that's something to consider. So if you do have something that's really focused in on one specific segment of serious mental illness, it's not a bad thing to consider some other perspectives. If people have gone through a different version of serious mental illness, it's probably a cool angle to think about, because they're going to look at it slightly differently, but they're still going to be locked in and have a very similar experience.
Yeah, just wanted to add that also when engaging the community-based organizations, you need to be aware that there are various different types. And when it comes to particular lived experience, there are organizations of persons with lived experience, and these are led and governed by people with lived experience. And then there are organizations for persons with lived experience, which are more or less run by professionals or allies on behalf of people with lived experience. So of course, engaging the different techniques that Joana said and Rachel has mentioned, but you need to consider the type of organization you are engaging.
Fantastic. Thank you all. Maybe a last question from Wim Welling, and then we have to move on. But please write your questions in the chat and we'll try to address them later.
Yeah, thanks. I'm really inspired by the talks, but when I talk to a lot of people with the lived experience we are working with in research groups, in many research groups, they're really only starting to do this, and they're trying to learn. But also there are maybe only 1 or 2 people with lived experience then trying to contribute, and they very often feel alone or don't know how to do it, or in research groups it's vice versa, because sometimes we think we ask the right questions, but then it doesn't work. So how do you have some recommendations for research groups and institutes that are not really experienced with a large body of people with lived experience?
It's a fantastic question. I'll take the first shot at that, which is bring a person in, bring a couple in early while you're developing those research questions. Start lived experience before the research. That's going to be an absolute massive value add. Not only are you going to learn the right questions, right research, also the right tone. Words are extremely important within mental health, mental illness. The way that you approach it, the way the questions are asked. So the unique part about that too, about what you were saying about not getting sometimes the best answers in a market research setting, is at the same time, peer support and surrounding yourself with mental illness with folks who've gone through the same thing is also extremely comforting and something that's been valuable for me throughout my entire journey. So if you can find those right people and you keep them along throughout the ride, that's where you see the brilliance. You're going to always go through a patient story and you're going to get passion. You're going to get excitement afterwards. That happens, right? You bring in a patient, they tell their story in a research setting, at a university, at a company, people get psyched, right? But then that dwindles off and they get right back into their normal day to day. Think about that. Think about taking that passion, that insight, that experience, that excitement that is taking your entire team to the next level and keeping them around, and they're still there and they're right at the seat of the table. That's what effective lived experience looks like. So that would be my answer.
Thank you so much, John. Thank you so much to all the panelists. We need to move on now for our breakout rooms. And I'll be very quick with the explanation so that we actually move into the breakout rooms. So again, we're using this fishbowl style that gives the power of a small group conversation with the benefit of a full group dialogue. This means that even if your team doesn't get a chance to present today, the idea is that you still get something out of the other people's presentations, the feedback they receive. So we really encourage you to be an active participant, even if you're not presenting. The way this will work is that we'll split into 4 rooms. So each will have about 10 teams. Around 40 teams will present their lived experience plan in the room briefly. Then the team will receive feedback from the expert in the room and the peers. And the idea is that the teams take good takeaways for then improve their lived experience plans. So again, the idea is that the non-presenting teams are also participating actively. So you're listening, you're posting reflections and feedback in the chat so that actually everyone takes away ideas to strengthen your own lived experience plan. So I've emailed everyone your rooms in advance, but here's a little plan of where you are. I hope no one gets lost. And so I'll invite Courtney to open the breakout rooms. And we'll have a little bit less time, so we'll be together there for 40 minutes. And yes, enjoy, and we'll see each other in 40 minutes. Thank you, everyone. Welcome back, everyone. So I will just invite our experts to do a quick wrap-up of what happened in your specific breakout rooms. So maybe let's start with Rachel. Maybe Rachel is not back yet.
I can go if you'd like. Oh, sorry.
Shuranjeet, do you want to start with the highlights of your breakout room?
Yeah, absolutely. So we had a lot of interesting conversation in the breakout room with teams who have evidently thought a lot about their lived experience involvement, from design to delivery and dissemination of the research. For me, there are a few points that really stuck out. One of the teams was talking about the specific considerations they're putting towards working with lived experience experts who have experiences of social anxiety, and then thinking about how the involvement framework can create a space that is most supportive for people to be able to apply their expertise and to be able to share and to be able to shape the research in that context. I thought that was a really thoughtful point. Another one of the teams really made a great point, which was about wanting to do an independent evaluation about the experience of being a lived experience expert on their program, well, on their research. And I thought that was really interesting because often we find we might have lived experience involvement infrastructure, but how do we know whether that was impactful or meaningful, and felt right, felt comfortable, felt supportive for the lived experience experts themselves, especially as this might be something that teams are doing as something that's new rather than an established practice. And so I thought that was a great reflexive question about how to undertake an independent evaluation of a team's lived experience involvement infrastructure on the research itself. So a lot of really good questions, a few questions that are a bit more meta in their approach, but I thought that was really good and really fantastic conversation.
Great, thank you, Shandy. Over to you, John.
Yeah, I want to start by saying, biggest thing that I took out of the breakaway room is just excitement. The fact that we have you guys so focused and dedicated on making a difference in this space just jazzed me up. I feel honored to be here and be a part of it. Couple of the things from ours that I thought were very intriguing are, when is it appropriate to have the use of a caregiver. Depending on the technology or what you guys are researching, it's extremely important. So just defining when that is and when the right time to get that person involved is huge. We want to make sure that lived experience is involved before you even think you need lived experience. I mean, that's one of the coolest parts, right? Is you're not going to know when should we get them in? Get them in early. Get them in as you guys are defining things, developing things before the workshops. Make sure that they're integrally involved so that you can have absolutely the most successful project possible. And then the other one is try to think about what's wrong, like what could be what's a bad scenario of what could happen, and trying to actively consider somebody. For instance, we were talking about one with involuntary hospitalizations. Involuntary hospitalizations are something that are extremely traumatic for most people involved. And so making sure that we can kind of talk to people who've been through the involuntary process, who've come out the other side, who are closer to remission or feeling better, how do we ultimately utilize them to make the experience better for people who are coming in the next time? And so we can kind of work that in. So just, different angles, different approaches, ways to think about it. But again, thank you guys so much for having me. And please, anybody, if you need anything, reach out to me on LinkedIn. Happy to help beyond this.
Thank you. Rachel?
Yeah, ditto on my takeaway, just that there's a really great amount of thought that's gone into this. And I think we're starting from a place that's definitely cut above, and feel free to contact me for further feedback on LinkedIn. Like John, we had some conversation about soliciting engagement on how people perceive and interpret the potential uses of a technology, and their attitudes towards it, whether as parents, caregivers, people with lived experience. They may, like John said, anticipate issues that feel uncomfortable, in that are things that the research team assumes are just de facto good things, right? Questions about parents and caregivers, and balancing that lived experience with the lived experience of people who are the primary people experiencing the phenomenon themselves, particularly when they're kids and otherwise, and how to balance that out a little bit. And then a lot of the questions and conversations revolved around how to prepare people, how to prepare the lived experience experts with the necessary context around whatever construct it is that you're curious about their experience and thoughts around, right? So if it's something like if there's a concern that people might suggest outcome measure questions that get at something different than what the original question in the original outcome measure was doing, preparing your lived experience experts on, like, this is what this thing is doing, this is how it's doing it, and then having specific questions about, how are you feeling about what it's doing, and then you can get to more specific questions about how to make it relevant to them.
Thank you so much, Rachel. And very quickly, Joy.
Thank you so much. It was really great hearing what different people from our group are planning on doing and how to best incorporate lived experience. And some takeaways that is this is an ongoing process and not just an event or workshop. So involving persons' lived experience need to be at different stages. And then there needs to be a level of flexibility and accommodation, because no one size fits all and everyone's experience matters and counts. And then also in terms of how to balance the cultural considerations with different groups of persons with lived experience, and also how to enable that cross-learning so that they're not just set aside as a team of persons with lived experts, but, as for them to feel part of the main team. And then finally, we did have one question whereby someone asked in terms of getting ethical approval, because they need to include lived experts, but then there is a challenge in terms of the ethical approval process. So I'm not sure if I represented the question well, so please feel free to ask the question, but we said if you could please bring it to the group for someone who might have an answer for us.
Thank you so much, Joy. Thank you to everyone. Unfortunately, we have no more time for questions, but if you have extra questions, put them on the chat or write to us after, and we'll try to address everything. So we've reached the end of today's workshop. I just want to say a big thank you to everyone, and some quick reminders. So all the resources, the recording of today, the notes, the chat, we'll be sharing that on our Accelerator participant page. Also very important to us, please take a few minutes to fill out the short feedback survey. This is really important for us. So the link is now in the chat, and also you can use this QR code. And yes, our next accelerator session will continue to build on this work. We'll be already on the 15th, so stay tuned. And most important of all, I want to say a huge thank you to our speakers, our fantastic panelists. Thank you so much, and I hope that we'll stay in touch and that participants can address more questions to you. Thank you to Wellcome, and thank you to everyone in the Neuromatch team that helped, and thank you for the participants for being here today. And we'll see each other at the next event. Thank you, everyone.